Good morning. Glad to have a few minutes together today, and as we get busy with our week, I hope you'll keep in mind the importance of your life, what you matter to the work of God. I was thinking this week it's impossible for us to talk about the love that we would have for another and not with that also talk about introducing them to the Lord Jesus Christ, or to help Christians grow in grace. Um, to let somebody go to hell obviously means we have no love for them whatsoever. And we've had great attendance at our soul winning meetings, and a lot of our missionaries seems like the devil's won some victories, but we know God always wins. But our missionaries have been more locked down recently than ever. Nate and Terry Beal down in Chile, and Jonathan and Brittany and Thailand, Go and Danielle in Japan, and others. Seems like there's been more of a restriction on our missionaries to even get to church or to even get out of their house. A lot of pressures on them. And as we sit here in America with some liberty, I hope we take advantage of it. We realize that knowing the gospel, that we would pass out tracts, try to witness to people, give them the gospel, at least give them an invitation to church, pray for them, ask God to help you be in the right place at the right time to be a help to others. It's a great need. And again, we know God works. We know God has plans. And God is not off in a far distant planet not paying attention. He knows what's going on around us. But likewise, we want to be obedient. And as the children of God, we ought to labor to be that way. Hope you'll continue. If you think of it, I mentioned it Sunday. But if you'd pray for Pastor Bell there in Columbus, where I was last week, and then for Pastor Doug Fisher down in San Diego, with both of them with health. As far as I know, Brother Fisher had his heart surgery yesterday, and I'm not in the first call list, so I don't know for sure. Last week I thought it was Wednesday, and they postponed it to yesterday. And so if you think to pray for him, he's a good man, a dear friend, and been faithful through these years. And we've got some of our own, Anna Paxson. We know Anna, she comes real faithful, and she had a knee replacement or some kind of knee surgery last week, and she's in a rehab for the moment. If you think to pray for her, we've got some great families that are having their share of physical issues. And if you're well, thank God for it. Be sure you've taken time to be grateful. And I want to just mention a quick note, April 20th, on this day, just reading a little bit about John Clark. You've heard me talk about him before. He was instrumental in establishing the Rhode Island and with Roger Williams as a free colony, as a place, the first place that we know of in the world history where there's total freedom of conscience, freedom of religion. And on this day, he died April 27th, 1676, 100 years before our Declaration of Independence was signed. But let me just read a word or two about him. Clark, upon becoming a dissenter, he'd been apprenticed to a doctor, became a skilled physician, a student of law and theology. But he was also, as he learned, he became a real advocate of religious liberty and liberty of conscience, a term used long before Jefferson was around. Clark became a dissenter, moved to Holland to avoid persecution, as many people did. And there he started rubbing shoulders with some Baptists. Baptists, of course, throughout history have labored for liberty, of conscience, that you can believe what you want. You want to believe that, gathering doorknobs gets you to heaven. You can do that and end up in hell, but they're going to defend your right to believe what you want to believe. You want to believe in rosary beads or burning incense to Buddha. The Bible-believing people, as designated as Baptists, have always, one of the big things that made the Baptist church different from the Protestants and the Catholics was liberty of conscience, that a man could believe what he wants in here, and you would not be compelled to believe something. Of course, the Baptists were also very missions minded, and they were soul winners. They were out telling people about the gospel, but they weren't forcing anybody. And so, excuse me, So John Clark, he was born in 1609, had a great influence, and so a long series of events brought John Clark to the Massachusetts Bay Colony, and there, of course, he along the way he ended up running into Roger Williams. 12 years they traveled back and forth from America to England, laboring to get um, a charter so they could be completely free. And they thought that they would get the support of Cromwell and the British leaders, because the Baptists had been very supportive of Cromwell, but it didn't happen. Just because you're good to people, that doesn't mean they're going to be good back to you. I think we've learned that as the years go by. You can love and care for people and have them turn right around and stab you in the back, and we think that's terrible. Yeah, it happened to Jesus with Judas, and it happened to Paul with his followers, and let's just relax. God's still on the throne. But when Charles II was crowned king in England, that's when, after 12 years of laboring, John Clark, as a Baptist preacher, and then working with Roger Williams, got the Rhode Island Charter for this, now the state of Rhode Island. And in going into that state, you see the sign, Birthplace of Freedom. And most of them don't know the story, of course, because our public schools don't want to tell the story of religious liberty and Bible-believing Baptist people doing what they did. But here's the charter. Our royal will and pleasure is that no person within the said colony at any time hereafter shall be in any wise molested, punished, disquieted, or called in question for differences of opinion in matters of religion. And he goes through some typical lawyer type talk, but he goes on, but that all and any persons may from time to time and at all times hereafter freely and fully have and enjoy his and their own judgments and conscience in matter of religious concernments throughout the tract of land hereafter mentioned. And it was just basically it was the words of Charles II that gave us the Rhode Island Charter, and in God's great mercy gave us the birthplace of liberty. And of course, liberty grows. People start realizing a lot of the trouble in China right now is people hear and people find out, and they find out about the freedoms that Americans have, and they find out the freedoms that other people in Europe have, and the internet and books and different things come to their hands, and they think, why can't we have that? Well, they can't have it because they're under communist rule. And then we've got a bunch of stupid Americans trying to get under socialist, which is just one step closer to communist. And here we got the Chinese trying to get free, and we got the stupid Americans trying to get enslaved. Oh man, humanity is not very bright, and only by the grace of God can we get anything done. And the goodness and the peace we've enjoyed in America is only a product of some people who founded our country that had Bibles. And they weren't all Christians, but they all had Bibles. They had an old King James Bible, by the way, and that Bible was their guide. And even those who were not professing Christians knew this was the source of law and morality, and that providence, as George Washington often said, providence shined down on people who honored this book. So most of our laws in America in the first 100 years were all Bible-based laws. Now we've got all kinds of stupid laws based on human opinion and social concerns and dumb things like that. And of course, we have a lot of communist laws. We've got a lot of laws against the Word of God now, because for the last 50 years, we've raised a generation of people in our schools without the Bible, without prayer, and it's not just the public schools, it's the Christian parents who let their kids get out of church. Mom and dad staying home on Sunday, going to the beach or the mountains on Sunday, instead of putting their families in church. And so we've got 50 plus years where Sunday school was forgotten, church was forgotten, Wednesday prayer meeting and Bible study was forgotten, daily Bible reading in our homes was forgotten, and then the public schools added to that with evolution and a pro-abortion and no Bible and prayer in our schools. And so we've got a heathen nation, and a nation that has no problem murdering babies all the way up to the moment those babies are born. We've got advocates, of course, across the country that have no problem with that. And, we need to at some point decide that God's our only hope, and not that he's our only hope, woe is us, but God is our hope. Praise the Lord, we've got hope. And the world around us doesn't have hope, but you and I have hope, and we can trust in him. I want to show you a verse today in Ezekiel. If you want to look with me at Ezekiel chapter 18. And I was just thinking about people and how foul and perverse critics and slanderers are. There are people who will take all of Thomas Jefferson's brilliance and throw it out because he was a slave owner. And he was born, raised, brought up in that culture. I'm not justifying slavery. Obviously, no one in America is. But that culture, everybody, it was around the world. It wasn't just in America. And America was the ones that were evolving this idea that men are created equal. And it was a labor. We fought a war over it. We killed each other over it. States' rights and liberty of conscience and all these things were huge things. But, because a guy grew up in communist Russia doesn't mean everything he wrote was bad. Because a man worked in the military under Hitler doesn't mean he's a horrible, wretched creature who should have he and his children and grandchildren burned at the stake or something. You're in that, and so often, even in their own conscience, they're wrestling with it, but it's where they are, it's what's there. And a lot of times they don't know what to do different. They don't know what the other option is. There are a lot of people looking for freedom in America. They weren't sure how to find it. They weren't sure because no one had ever done it before. The fact that the church shouldn't rule over people, that was a whole new thing. And but many people will take our founders and they find some weakness and throw them out. But it's interesting, John Kennedy, with all of the Kennedy money made on booze and the obvious to most people historically, the womanizing that went on. See, liberals don't throw out their heroes when they have blots on them. But conservatives pick up the good of a John Kennedy. Of course, there's some good things he said and did. I like the fact that he stood up against Russia and said, get your missiles out of Cuba, we're going to blow that thing up. I have no problem respecting the good deeds of someone who may in several areas differ from me or even have messed up. David, in case you didn't know, David had some problems in his life, but we don't throw the book of Psalms out. And Paul, before his conversion, was pretty rough on Christians, and we don't throw out the Pauline epistles. But thinking about the people of God, especially when it comes to our children, and I've heard people say, and I don't right or wrong, I've heard people say the reason we're in the Faith Baptist Church is because of my wife and my children, because they saw kids who were apparently happy, enjoyed life, loved their mom and dad, were obedient, did well in school. And as kids get adults, all kids go, they make their own decisions and all. We have no idea where our children will be. Our youngest is, I think, Josiah's 22 right now. And where he'll be at 42, I have no idea. But I know people who came to our church hoping to learn some things about family. Well, you know what? Some kids, as well as I do, there are kids who are good. It's in them. They're born that way. And I know we're all born sinners, but there's some kids you could throw them in a public school and they're going to do right. And other kids, they're going to be a challenge no matter where you put them. But I know people who will throw somebody out as far as anything spiritual because of their children or maybe a lost marriage. And I want to take a minute or two and talk about truth and picking. Maybe I'll talk a little more in the next couple of days about picking leaders and who we follow and how we handle things. But let me read you a verse here in Ezekiel chapter 18. And twice, if you look at verse 4 and verse 20, look at the end of verse 4, the soul that sinneth, it shall die. Look over to verse 20, the soul that sinneth, it shall die. And so the thought is a continued thought. He's going through this chapter and he's teaching a Bible doctrine about the people of Israel. And he's talking about, if you were to go through here, if there's a man who has done right and his kid did wrong, you don't punish the dad. And then it goes on a little later. If there's a kid who did right and his dad did wrong, you don't punish the kid. You just, and again, rather than read the whole chapter, look at verse 18. As for his father, because he cruelly oppressed, spoiled his brother by violence, and did that which is not good among the people, lo, even he shall die in his iniquity. So it's the dad. If the dad did wrong, the dad's the one who's going to be punished. And that's why at the beginning in verse 4 and in verse 20, he says, the soul that sinneth, it shall die. Look at verse 20. The son shall not bear the iniquity of the father, neither shall the father bear this iniquity of the son. The righteousness of the righteous shall be upon him, and the wickedness of the wicked shall be upon him. But if the wicked will turn from his sins that he hath committed, and keep all my statutes, and do that which is lawful and right, he shall surely live. So the principle here is each person gives account of themselves. Think with me just for a minute. I've heard people criticize because someone's kids were not good kids. Let me just give you, we don't know enough Bible. Let's go back to maybe the greatest prophet and judge Israel had, Samuel. Samuel was as godly and good a man as we had. But you read there at 1 Samuel, and you'll find that the people came to Samuel as he aged and said, give us a king, because your kids are bad kids. And so here the greatest, there was no kings yet. He anointed Saul. Saul was the first king. But here's Samuel, this godly man. And yet it was very well known. Samuel's kids were bad kids. Eli, the man he was a priest. He's the one that Hannah in 1 Samuel chapter 1 prayed for a child, and God gave her Samuel. And Samuel was raised literally by Eli in the temple. And Eli had such a good influence, or God's hand, whatever. But Samuel turned out incredible. But Eli's own sons were horrible. They had moral problems. They had religious problems. They had greed and inappropriate financial issues, and using our vernacular, whatever you want to call it. But Eli's kids were a mess, and Samuel's kids did not go right. And we could look at David, the man after God's own heart. Do we need to talk about his children? One of his sons, and again, he had multiple wives, but one son raped a half-sister, and then the half-sister's full brother, Absalom, killed Amnon, and we've got murder in the family and rape in the family, and it was a mess. And late in David's life, as he's about to die, Adonijah, one of the last things you read about before David's death, his kids doing, is Adonijah tried to usurp the throne, tried to take over and be the king. And that would be in 1 Kings chapter 1, if I'm not mistaken. And of course, Solomon was given the throne, and Solomon was the one who was going to be king. But we all love when our children do well, but your standing is not based on whether your kids do well or not. The fact is, in my experience of just watching and reading history, the greater the Christian, the more attacks are launched at the children or the marriage, because the devil wants to destroy your work and the work of God and the testimony. And so if you're making a big impact for God, you can plan on him trying to attack your money or your marriage or your children or something about you to try and discredit you. Well, you know what? The truth is the truth. Whether my marriage works or not, or whether my children do well or not, truth is still truth. And the word of God and the truths of God's word. We could go to Solomon. Solomon was the wisest man that ever lived. Well, how did that go when his son Rehoboam ignored the counsel of the old men and took the counsel of the young men and split the kingdom? And what a mess. You got Manasseh and Ammon, two of the worst men that ever ruled over the nation of Judah. And they give birth to a grandchild, and then child is Manasseh, and his son was Ammon, two horrible men. And then Ammon's son, Josiah. Josiah brought great revival. Well, does Josiah doing right give credibility to Ammon? No, it's just for whatever reason, God called that young man. Now, maybe a repentant grandpa might have been the key. If you read it, you find out late in life, Manasseh got right with God. not soon enough to save his own child, perhaps, but maybe he was the influence on Josiah. The Bible doesn't say, but good kids come from bad situations, and bad kids can come from good situations. But I'm not going to throw somebody out because they have a child that struggled. If you want to read about Dwight Moody, the greatest evangelist in the first 100 years of our nation, maybe the most influential evangelist. He was a Congregationalist, wasn't a Baptist, never baptized anybody, but he started the Moody Bible Institute. He started the Bible Institute movement in America in the late 1800s. Bible institutes all over America sprang up with a model that Moody started. Moody had only gone to 8th grade, I think, never went to college, and yet God used him so greatly. He had huge revivals all over America and some in Europe as well. And but as he got older, he turned the ministry, and he had a great work. I want to say it was in Northampton, campgrounds, and not for camping, but camp meaning like preaching. They'd bring people up for great conferences and things. And his kids turned it totally liberal, just turned it completely away from God. And are we going to throw out Dwight Moody? No, he was one of the greatest men that we ever knew. Again, 1860 to 1910, somewhere in there, his great ministry. Well, following on the heels of Dwight Moody was Billy Sunday, the wild, reckless baseball player from Iowa, kid who could run faster barefooted than the fastest runner on the Chicago baseball team, professional baseball team. And Billy Sunday goes from Iowa to professional baseball, famous all over, and then he becomes an alcoholic. He finds no joy, no happiness, and he's walking down the street by the Pacific Garden Mission in downtown Chicago, and Billy Sunday gets saved. He quits baseball, goes to work as helping Wilbur Chapman and some other evangelists, and he gets involved in this ministry of preaching. And pretty soon, I believe it was Chapman he was with, who had another meeting, but their meeting they were at was going so well they wanted to extend it another week, and Chapman had to leave. And so he said to Billy Sunday, "You're going to have to preach." And Billy Sunday said, "I can't preach. I've never preached." And so Wilbur Chapman gave him 4 or 5 sermons of his own, just gave him the notes. And if you've ever preached or taught a lesson, someone else's notes are not all that helpful. And if it's not here, if it's not your message, it's a hard thing to do. And yet, Billy Sunday stepped up, preached, and that was the beginning of an incredible ministry, coast to coast in America. He spent 12 weeks in New York. When he stopped preaching in New York, there was not a bar left open. Prohibition was going in those days. Billy Sunday was the big advocate of getting rid of booze, which would have been good if we could have kept it that way in America. The point is, Billy Sunday's kids died and went to the devil. I don't know whether they were saved or not, but the kids were drunks and a mess. The very booze Billy Sunday fought through his whole career. One story, if it's true, it seems like it's documented. The last time Billy Sunday preached, right as he walked to the pulpit, someone put a newspaper on the pulpit so Billy Sunday couldn't help see, and walked up, and the headlines in the paper said, "Billy Sunday's drunkard son dies." And supposedly it was the last time Billy Sunday preached. And but we're not going to throw out the great ministry of Billy Sunday because his children made bad choices. And what recklessness for us to throw out truth and good because there is humans in our lives. The same story could be said of divorce. And some of the finest people I know, some of the greatest Christians I know, have been through a divorce. And none of us advocate divorce. I don't know anybody in our Christian circles who would be pro-divorce. Of course, we believe in marriage until death do us part, and we believe that. But when your spouse doesn't believe that, it's pretty hard to know what to do. And some great preachers that I know, I feel in my own heart that if you lose your marriage, you probably should not pastor. Doesn't mean you can't preach, but to oversee a church, my personal feeling is that you need to have your own house in order to oversee a church. But everybody doesn't feel that way, and that's between them and God. Over in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, it says, "Art thou bound to a wife? That would be marriage. Seek not to be loosed. That'd be divorce. Art thou loosed from a wife? That would be divorce. Seek not a wife. And if thou marry, thou hast not sinned. I think it's down about verse 23. And like we read here in Ezekiel 18, the soul that sinneth, it shall die. God will deal with the sinners. God will deal with people, his own children. He'll deal with those who do wrong in his own way. But because a preacher lost his marriage, you don't even know some of the preachers that you've heard and you thought, wow, God's really helped me through that preacher. And years ago, he lost a marriage, and some great people, I mean, great Christians. And in our church, preachers, laymen, friends in churches around the area, my parents had both lost a marriage, and they got married, and again, two of the greatest servants of God you could ask for. And it's nothing that anybody would want, but it's a reality. Remember the woman at the well in John chapter 4, she'd had 5 husbands, and she was living with a guy who wasn't even married to him, and she got the whole town out to hear Jesus. And later, Jesus found, the religious people found a woman supposedly taken in the very act of adultery, brought her, not the man. And Jesus said to the woman, neither do I condemn thee, go and sin no more. There's so many stories of people who had family issues, marriage issues, or issues with their children. You go back to the ministry of Elijah, and there's one of the prophets, a prophet died, a preacher died, his wife and kids were the one with remember they poured the oil and it kept pouring and pouring and pouring. She came to Elijah and said, what do I do? My husband's dead, and we owe money. Can you imagine dying and owing money? I can't even imagine it. If you don't owe money when you die, you're unusual. And here this preacher, he'd been a good preacher, faithful preacher, but money was not going well. And so here he is, and he dies and leaves his wife with debt. Well, God steps in and God takes care of things. And the oil poured, and she filled all the vessels, and the preacher said, Elijah said, go sell the oil and pay the debt. Her kids were going to end up in like a debtor's prison sort of thing, like enslaved bondservants, they called it in those days, until they worked off the debt their dad had left. You can, the Apostle Paul, I know how to abound and I know how to be abased. I know how to be full, and I know how to suffer hunger. The idea that because you had a burden or you had some things go wrong with your money, your marriage, your children, that you're somehow off of God's list of being used, that's crazy. And the idiocy, the absolute craziness that we would scratch someone from our world of respect and love and usefulness because they had a problem. Has anybody looked in the mirror lately? What craziness. And I look at the Hall of Fame of great Christians. I mean, Jephthah, if you know the story of Jephthah, I think Jephthah was totally wrong in his decision. But you know what? He did what he thought was the right thing to do. And if you don't know the story of Jephthah, you'll have to find it. It's in the Judges. But you can make wrong decisions. We're flesh, and we have a great God. That's what forgiveness is all about. That's what the blood of Christ is all about. And my library is full of books of people who have had some theological wrong, or had some marital or kids or money or whatever. Just things go on. Someone said, I've never read this in their own writings, so that's what I heard, but someone said that Dwight Moody and Charles Spurgeon, both late 1800s, for a long time, Spurgeon smoked cigars. And Moody, of course, was a very large man. And supposedly the discussion, Moody said to Spurgeon, if you'd quit smoking cigars, maybe God would use you. Of course, he had the biggest church in London. And then Spurgeon mentioned Moody, well, if you'd lost some weight, maybe God would use you, whether it was true or who knows what. But at some point, Spurgeon decided he was used to endorse cigars, and he said, I don't want to endorse anything but Christ. He quit smoking cigars. Okay, a guy smokes cigars. Are we gonna throw the man out? What is wrong with this kind of Christianity that acts as if we are so perfect, and that we've been the God-ordained pointers to point out everybody's weakness? Over in Romans, and I don't know how long I've gone here, so I'm not gonna go have us turn there. In Romans, he says, "Who art thou that judgeth another man's servant. To his own master he standeth or falleth. And yea, he shall be holden up, for God is able to make him stand. And I'm nobody's judge. And of course, Matthew, he said, judge not that you be not judged. And that doesn't mean I can't see this as a person who's the wrong crowd. I'm not going to hang around them. There's a lot of Bible that says separate from people for various reasons. But I hope you'll be careful not to be the slanderers and the critics of good people, simply because some scornful person got you thinking. If somebody comes along to you and points out the weakness in another, you're dealing with a scorner and a critic. Well, I mean, if someone does it, you might say, well, do you know anything good about that person? You might see if you can't find 100 good things. And probably it's somebody who's never done much, who's slandering and criticizing somebody who's done very much. Or maybe if preachers do it because they try to make famous preachers look smaller because they want them to look better. And what craziness that is. We're a mess. Isn't the love and mercy of God incredible that he puts up with us? I hope you'll go into your week loving people and being good to people, and don't let this world of scorners and critics get you being a scorner yourself. And that's why he said, the soul that sinneth, it shall die. I'm not writing off a good man or lady because they had kid problems. I'm not writing off a good man or lady if they had marriage problems. I had a couple in my office one day. I thought, you know what? I don't know anybody that doesn't like you two except you two. Everybody I know likes her and him. I thought, if you could only like each other as much as all of us like you, but we're flesh, and we are frail. And I hope you'll have mercy. God says, I'll have mercy on the merciful. And I'm not going to quit preaching holiness. I'm not going to quit preaching my standards of righteousness. And you shouldn't either. You shouldn't lower your standards of good and decent and right. But let's not just try to destroy somebody because we found out they were flesh. And especially when it comes to the home. And may we be very guarded about those things. So I hope you have a good Tuesday. And look forward to tomorrow and our Wednesday night Bible study. I missed last Wednesday, but I heard Matt did a great job. And thanks so much for being a great, great church. And thank you for your love and your encouragement.